So I know we're about to invade Venezuela and start denaturalizing citizens, and the economy is about to collapse because there's nothing to hold it up anymore. But I want to talk about climate change and what happened at COP30. It's always more complicated than that, of course, but the sum up of COP30 was pretty simple. We are finally acknowledging that we aren't doing shit about the climate, that the high emission scenarios are going to get higher. We aren't going to have any kind of multilateral control of either fossil fuels or deforestation. And we're going to spend out time bickering about low and moderate emission scenarios that are completely impossible in the face of runaway warming. I'm not saying that nothing good came out of it, and some individual nations are building renewables and preserving land and making real and meaningful efforts that cost them to prevent extreme climate change. But the fact is that climate change could only ever be addressed globally, and we have been playing a game of chicken I'll cut after you do for decades. What direct good came out of COP30? I mean, a lot of rich people got to take trips on their private jets after all, but what really was notable about COP30 is that all the pretense is gone. And in a way, if you take climate change seriously, that's a mercy and a relief. If the first 2 decades of the 2000s were about setting goals that were inadequate, but sort of kind of seemed relevant, and then missing them and pretending we were going to do better when we weren't, we are at least done with that. I realize I sound cynical, but I'm only cynical because I'm right about this and have been for 20 years. As I keep writing, unchecked global warming is the only kind we have or have ever had. The high emissions scenarios have been tracking for years. No rich nations had any real intention of doing anything inconvenient to their economies or culture to deal with climate change. And if you think this is in the U.S. a Democrat-Republican issue, it isn't. Under Democratic presidents, we did indeed pretend we were doing things about climate change and make some changes that weren't too inconvenient, but none of them had anything to do with the scale of what was coming. And we also subsidized and supported things we knew would undermine this under the Democrats. The difference between Democrats and Republicans on this matter was that the Republicans said that climate change wasn't happening, while the Democrats just hoped someone else would do something about it. Yes, Trump's end of restrictions on drilling and coal are terrible. Yes, they will make it worse, but it was already going to be very, very bad. The scope of what had to be done has been clear for a very long time as well. No emissions cuts or fossil fuel changes were ever seriously proposed that ever actually would have addressed the scale of climate change. You can go back and look at what would have to happen to keep us below 1.5 degrees Celsius and ask whether any of the agreements would have done that. The focus on carbon offsets, now acknowledged as complete nonsense, and something I've been calling bullshit for decades, and proportional reductions that didn't do any reducing of overall emissions. Part of the issue is the global rise of the hard right and the end of a pretense of giving a shit, especially in America. But as I've noted, that's only part of the issue. As I've said before, I think the Republicans and Democrat are now closer than they have been on this one, as at least the tech bro side of the New Republicans believes in climate change. So given the terrible choice between not doing anything adequate about climate change and lying about it under the Democrats, and not doing anything about climate change and not lying about it under the Republicans, I'm pretty sure this is a wash. At least it shifts the focus, as it should, to what it is going to be like to live on this planet we've collectively chosen. The answer to that is truly awful. We are looking at near-term reductions in crop yields that measure 30% or more. We are within decades of a likely AMOC shutdown that will boil the equator and freeze parts of the north, as well as disrupt global rainfall. We are looking at an increased rate of warming that has never been part of human history and exceeds our ability to adapt to. At just the moment, global cooperation has largely ceased. But we were looking at those things anyway, and at least now we know it's bleak AF, but I prefer being honest about it. We're going to 3 to 4C, and if you want your grandchildren and other people's grandchildren to survive, we're going to have to start all over again and build something else, something new, a way of addressing a global threat globally. But at least we're being honest now.